Achaemenids, precursors to the Persians, left inscriptions in ancient Elamite, but eventually came to speak Aramaic. Elamite, the Akkadian word for Highlander, was used to describe those who came from that mountainous area. But by that time, they were true Elamites, a mixture of Elam's entourage and whoever the indigenous population was before Elam took up residence.
This comes from the book The Persians. When it was first found, the script was called Proto-Elamite on the assumption that its underlying language was somehow related to the Elamite later spoken and written at Susa. The Proto-Elamite script has never been deciphered, although some progress has been made toward understanding the overall organization of the tablets.
A better designation would have been pre-Elamite or non-Elamite, but archaeologists labored under the idea that Susa had been founded by Elamites. And so the language somehow had to be associated, even though they should have seen there was no connection. The next historical period of Susa is called Old Elamite, corresponding to Susa IV, beginning at 2700 BC, a date that reasonably could coincide with the arrival of true Elamites with family ties back to Noah.
The key to success in this era of expansion after the flood was closely tied to weaponry. Armed with bronze swords, the son of Noah had clear advantage, and the resident indigenous populations were easily subdued. Whatever remnants there were or may have been became incorporated into nations bearing the names of Noah's progeny.
The generations of Noah may have founded some nations on virgin soil, but they also found primitive communities living in regions they desired, whose bloodlines, customs, and traditions were unlike theirs, and who spoke different languages, and whose skin color was lighter to the north and darker to the south. Why would Japhethites, who already knew where they were supposed to go and had their marching orders, so to speak, travel to Babylon and build a tower? The lands they were to settle were outside of Mesopotamia, had no floods, and required no mud brick platforms at all. And there is no record, biblical, historical, archaeological, or otherwise, that any of Japheth's kin were represented at Babylon.
Only later generations of Shem, named in the 11th chapter of Genesis, found themselves living in Babylon, ruled by a Hamitic king. It is these generations who became conflicted, confused, and confounded when the massive effort to build a monumental tower came to naught. The confusion of tongues was an event of importance to this particular line of Semites leading to Abraham, and the incident was preserved among those Semitic nations whose ancestors were present at Babylon when the confusion occurred.
Enuma Elish is a Babylonian creation myth first discovered in the library of King Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, present-day Mosul. Following is a small part.
Now, O Lord, thou who hast caused our deliverance, what shall be our homage to thee? Let us build a shrine whose name shall be called, Lo, a chamber for our nightly rest. Let us repose in it. Let us build a throne, a recess for his abode. On the day that we arrive, we shall repose in it. When Marduk heard this, brightly glowed his features like the day.
Each city had a protecting city god. Babylon had become a large, important city after the middle of the 3rd millennium BC in Mesopotamia, but the cities already in existence had preempted the important gods. There was no god of any significance left for such an important city. So instead of a god already known in the pantheon of gods, the Babylonians came up with a late generation god who supposedly was the son of an important god. And the god selected was the father, was Ea, the number 2 god after Anu, the father god. This gave Marduk the importance he needed for the mighty city.
Like that of lofty Babylon, whose building you have requested, let its brickwork be fashioned. You shall name it the sanctuary. The Anunnaki apply the implement.
Just as the later Jews had two classes of angels, cherubim and seraphim, so too did the Akkadians. The sky gods were called the Agigi, and the Anunnaki gods dwelt on the earth. In the law code of Hammurabi, the Anunnaki elevated the god Marduk among the Agigi gods.
For 1 whole year they molded bricks. When the second year arrived, they raised high the head of Isagila, equating Apsu.
The Tower of Babel was called Etmananki, the house of the foundation of heaven on earth. Esagila was a second tower constructed for Marduk. What they are saying is that the tower will be as high as the Apsu, the primordial waters, are deep.
Having built a stage tower as high as Apsu is deep, they set up in it an abode for Marduk, Enlil, and Ea. And their presence he adorned it in grandeur. To the base of Ishara, or heaven, its horns looked down. After they had achieved the building of Isagila, the Anunnaki themselves erected their shrines. All of them gathered. They had built as his dwelling. The gods, his fathers. At the banquet he seated. This is Babylon, the place that is your home.
Descendants of Shem and Arphaxad, together with Hamitic descendants at Babylon, may have cooperated in this enterprise, or they may have been at odds. Whatever the case, the Lord was not pleased and put an end to their foolishness by confusing their speech. As described by Oracles, and now all intercourse by some occult and overruling power ceased among men. By utterance they strove, perplexed and anxious to disclose their mind, but their lip failed them, and in lieu of words produced a painful, babbling sound. Clearly, building the tower and the confusion of tongues at Babel loomed large to the participants, but the tower itself was one among many. It may not have been the biggest, and it cannot be identified as the first or the last. The tower builders became confused, that much is clear, but that doesn't mean that we need to be. Once again, thank you for joining us.